As long as you don't keep making the same ones over and over again.
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook, presented by Details Interactive. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 28, and today's guest is Matt Blumberg. Great lineup of guests coming this year. Before we get started, a quick thank you, as always, to Max Brandstetter of the Wow Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at maxpodcasting.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Marketing Playbook podcast. Today, I'm joined by longtime industry friend Matt Blumberg, who's currently the co-founder of Bolster and previously the co-founder of Return Path. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Where do we find you these days, Matt? Probably working remotely somewhere.
I am sitting in my house, roughly in the same chair that I've been in since March. Just outside of New York City in Westchester County.
Okay, good. Well, I hope that you and your family are doing well. We're recording here right after, I guess we're the first week of January of 2021. We're still knee deep in our pandemic. Hopefully we see some light at the end of the tunnel here. But, before we get rocking too much into this, I like to get, my guest's first story. I kind of swiped that from somebody that I had listened to who was doing a podcast. Give the listeners a little background of where you grew up, and then anything that you think maybe helped to foreshadow what you wound up doing for your career.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in San Diego, which is about the nicest place in the country that's not Hawaii. Absolutely loved growing up there. My parents are still there, so it's a great place to go back and visit. The thing I could point to that would have foreshadowed my career was my dad. So very close to both my parents, but my dad was an entrepreneur. And he started after he went to business school in venture capital for a couple of years, which I also did early in my career. And then I went on to found a company which he ran for 30 to 35 years in the tech space. It was a hardware business, manufacturing business. But that's what I grew up with. I remember distinctly, I was 10 or maybe 11. And my dad let me sit in the dining room, like in the corner of the dining room, when he and his 3 co-founders met to form the company and talk about the name and the mission, and just sort of always assumed I was going to do something like that, and I ended up doing that now a couple times.
It's incredible. I mentioned to you, I think I've done 27 or 28 shows so far, and maybe a third of them, are people that started companies. And it's so interesting to hear there really is a foreshadowing event early in their career. Either they had, a role model that was an entrepreneur or a parent that was an entrepreneur, but there was definitely something early on, from that early lemonade stand to whatever it was, to, help precipitate being a startup guy. So that's really interesting. Tell us a little bit about schooling. You went East Coast.
I did. Yeah. I went to Princeton. I absolutely loved it. Had great education. Princeton doesn't have a business school. I was there for the general liberal arts experience. I majored in urban planning. There actually was, kind of a consistent theme there, which is I've always been interested in building things. So I played around before I settled on urban planning with actually doing architecture. And then I had moved to civil engineering as kind of my area of interest, but I was also always really interested in public policy, and urban planning is kind of the fusion of all those things. So great interdisciplinary education, never used it professionally.
So there was a method to the madness of urban planning.
At least when you look backwards at it.
Right. You and I caught up very early in 2020, right after COVID hit, and you were out in Colorado.
Yes.
Tell us about that experience, because I found it fascinating when you first explained it to me.
Yeah, so I have a lot of connections and have spent a lot of time in Colorado over the years. Return Path, which is the company that I ran in the email space for about 20 years, had a very significant presence in the Denver and Boulder area. I'm very close with a a pretty prominent venture capitalist there named Brad Feld from Foundry Group, who was on my board for most of the 20 years. So I've never lived out there, but I've spent a lot of time there. Right at the, sort of as the kind of public consciousness and of the pandemic was reaching fever pitch, which was the first couple of weeks of March. Brad called me up one day, and he's very close with Jared Polis, who's the governor of Colorado. And I had met Governor Polis a couple times over the years. He was also a tech entrepreneur, founded Blue Mountain Arts, founded ProFlowers, founded Techstars along with Brad, and then went on to be in Congress and then got elected governor. So he and Brad have been very close. And Brad called me and he said, hey, Jared Polis is looking to tap someone who's an entrepreneur, who's a business builder from the private sector, to come help him stand up his response team to the pandemic. He believes that state government and his state government employees and leaders are absolutely tremendous, hardworking, very knowledgeable people, but they're not wired to bend rules and break rules and do things differently and arrange the pieces in sort of different order. And that's what the response to the pandemic is going to require. So the governor's doing a lot of that work himself right now, but he really wants to tap someone for 6 to 12 months to come do that. And I know you don't live here and wouldn't be here permanently, but I also know you're available at the moment and you do have exactly that experience set. Can I convince you to, and part of what you can do is find your permanent replacement as well. So that's what I did. I spent only a few weeks on the ground out there. It was incredibly interesting. It was super rewarding. It was a ton of work. It was a ton of learning because I'd never done anything in government before. I'd never done anything in public health before. But along with the team that the governor gave me, we then really built an organization that we called the Innovation Response Team in something like 6 days. We marshaled a lot of forces from the private sector in Colorado. We were able to marshal a lot of forces from inside of state government. And we stood up an organization with, like 6 swim lanes and KPIs and staff and budget and everything else in a very, very, very short period of time. Of course, it helped that there was panic and a public health emergency, so we sort of had everyone's attention. But we were really able to get a lot of work done in a short period of time. We had, I can't even remember all of the swim lanes, but one of them was on alternative sourcing of PPE and getting local manufacturers to retool their lines to pump out hand sanitizer and masks and gloves. One of them was on testing and putting together the state's initial testing strategy. And as you know, each state was kind of on its own. So we had to figure out how to procure tests and understand the different types of tests and where could we use an antibody test versus an antigen test versus a PCR test versus a rapid test versus surveillance. So a lot of the things that now I think everyone, it feels like everyone in the country is a public health expert. There was a lot of work that we did in short order to, again, take the few people out of state government that really understood it, along with mobilizing a lot of other resources. I think the team in the end was a couple hundred people. And that's the work we did. So we got started with it. We found a very capable person in the Denver Boulder area named Sarah Thunberg to take it over from me. Sarah had both public sector and private sector experience. So in some ways, she was actually a lot better than I was at taking it and running with it. But great, and really, really interesting experience for the first leg of the pandemic. I wrote a whole bunch of blog posts about it. There's a series of 7 blog posts on my blog that sort of describe it literally day by day. And my blog is onlyoneceblog.com.
That's great. Congratulations. And you must be doing lots of podcasts and being very professional, because I didn't even have to prompt you for the blog posting.
I'm a little sad because I'm about to rebrand my blog, but I haven't done it yet. So the sneak preview is the new domain is startupceo.com, which matches the book that I wrote, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. So
there you go. Oh, that's impressive. Well, congratulations. Again, that's great work that you guys did. It's interesting, without getting too deeply in it. It's interesting that the governor back in March wasn't waiting around for federal government to kind of come in and do what perhaps some would think the federal government was going to do. It seems like they circumvented that almost immediately.
It was pretty clear pretty quickly that states were going to be on their own, and it was pretty clear that the so-called like federal emergency stockpile or whatever was bare. And I remember distinctly. I think these numbers are right too. The governor got off of a call with the vice president and all the governors, and got some allocation of something, and said, well, the good news. So they're cleaning out the national stockpile, and we got 70,000 PPE kits. And the head of public health in Colorado said, well, the state is currently burning through 68,000 of them a day. And it was like, oh, and that's what's coming from FEMA or from the stockpile. So I think it was pretty clear early on that states were going to have to figure out a lot of stuff on their own.
Right. So let's go back to the you leave Princeton, and where do you go from there?
A few different jobs before I started Return Path. My first job was management consulting at a firm called Mercer Management Consulting, which is now called Oliver Wyman. Then I decided had a great opportunity to jump to venture capital, which is a really tough field to get into. There just aren't very many jobs in it. So I was fortunate enough to work for a couple of years at General Atlantic Partners. GA today is a massive global private equity firm. At the time was a really like down the middle of the fairway venture capital firm, Series A, Series B, $5 to $10 million checks. And the firm's roots at the time I joined in '94 were mostly software. They were doing some very, very early internet deals in '94, '95. There wasn't much to do, but Priceline and E-Trade were a couple of the deals that we were working on. And after being there for a little while, I decided what I really was more interested in doing was being on the operating side and building a business and running a business. Although the experience at GA was incredibly valuable to understand the financing process and be on the other side of it. And I have lots of good friends today in the venture capital business who I worked with while I was there. Looked at a bunch of different opportunities to move into an operating role, fairly young and very limited experience, right? Consulting and venture capital that only teaches you how to operate so much. So I was sort of interviewing for jobs to be, kind of CEO's special projects guy. And the one that was most exciting, which I ended up jumping on, was at a company in New York called Moviefone. If you remember the old 777 film, interactive telephone, movie guide, and ticketing service.
I knew your voice from somewhere, Matt.
Not my voice, but he was one of the founders of the company, the guy that did the voice, Russ Leatherman. So I joined Moviefone in '95. Was there through the sale of the company, which was in '99, and so really kind of rode the internet 1.0 wave. And I had a pretty interesting role there. My first project, and this will just give you the point in the moment in time. My first project was to figure out what the internet was, and figure out in particular if the company had been thinking about building a visual version of Moviefone, which was a telephone service. And I think they had done a kiosk somewhere like as a test run. And they were trying to figure out whether strategically what we should do was build a website or we should do a proprietary deal with one of the dial-up services. So again, you really got to wind the clock back. The company had all these offers on the table from America Online, as it was called at the time, CompuServe, Prodigy, Delphi, Genie, everything that people were accessing via the 14.4 modem, to build an exclusive proprietary walled garden version of Moviefone. And my first project was, should we do one of those? Which one should we do? Or should we take a chance and build, an HTTP website on the open web and hope that people would come to it? So we made that choice. We built a website. And the years I was at Moviefone, I really had a couple of different jobs because we structured things differently at different times. But essentially I was the GM of the internet business there, from the construction of the first website through the sale of the company to AOL, head of marketing and the head of product management for the whole brand. So I did have some very good, I know this is a marketing oriented show. So I did have some very good experience running both the sort of brand marketing for Moviefone, which was really, really interesting. And we had a very outsized spend because we had a ton of bartered media. And then also ran the trade marketing side of it to movie studios and movie theaters, in addition to product and internet. So I did that through '99. And then in late '99, after we sold Moviefone to AOL, I started Return Path, which was a 20-year run also in the marketing space, running email marketing.
I have so many questions about return path, and I want to do them in an organized fashion. So, you leave movie phone, immediately start return path. There had to be something percolating in your head while you were at movie phone. There's a problem that I need to solve. What was that problem?
Yeah, so there were kind of two things that we set out to do at Return Path. The one that was obvious was fix a bunch of things around email. So we ended up in a business called email deliverability or email certification. The business we started was a little bit different, which you remember you were one of our very first clients. Was email change of address and email list hygiene and bounce management. But all of those kind of problems around email were things that I had identified while I was at Moviefone as being kind of gaps in the infrastructure around commercial email. So one of the things we did at Moviefone is we built I think one of the very first ever commercial email applications called Movie Mail in 1996, I think, or maybe 1997. People would sign up, they'd give us their zip code, their favorite movie types, and each person would get a custom email coming out of the database on Friday saying which movies were opening in the theaters near them with clickable show times to buy tickets, e-commerce, content, database. And this is pretty early on, and there was very little supporting technology for it. We kind of had to build everything ourselves. By 1999, there was an email service provider industry that was really good at getting mail out the door, but there were still a whole bunch of things missing around the way delivery actually works, and blacklists and spam blocks and bounces. And so the substance of the business at Return Path was really rooted in the experience that we had at Moviefone, because we built this really powerful application, but then had all these problems delivering. But the other thing that was, I always call them sort of the twin pillars of Return Path. We were very interested from the beginning of the company in being a very progressive employer. And what I mean by that is really pioneering some new ways of working and new ways of managing team members. We did a bunch of things in 1999 and 2000 that are pretty commonplace today, but no one was doing at the time. And that stuff also really had its roots in the experiences I had had in consulting and in venture capital and at Moviefone, which were, knowledge worker companies, but not run in a contemporary way. They were run, sort of an old school companies. I just sort of kept mental notes along the way of like, someday I'm going to start a business and we're going to do things differently. I'm really proud of a lot of the work we did at Return Path over the years. We built a phenomenal culture. We had a very people-centric, values-driven organization. And, like I said, it seems kind of silly in 2021 because some of the things we did, everyone is doing now. A lot of companies have sabbatical programs. A lot of companies have open vacation policies. There's a degree of transparency that you see in a lot of companies now, but those things were very, very unusual in 99. So we were very proud of pioneering a bunch of those things. So long answer to your question, but we were really hoping to solve two problems: make email marketing work better and make employment work better.
And so when I remember, it was probably you coming to visit me in those days. I was at Brooks Brothers.
I think the first sales call I did with you, you were at Hanover.
Yeah. I was at the company store working at which was owned by Hanover. That would have been 99, early part of 2000, and then I went over. So yeah, maybe it was company
There was
store.
once at Hanover, and then when you moved to Brooks Brothers, I remember meeting you upstairs at the store there.
Yeah, that's right. It was the eighth floor. That's a whole other story. That store is now closed. But when you have a business, a new business like this, and as I've bought lots of software and technology over time, to support marketing initiatives, there's a fairly long lead time, especially for something that is transcending new ground. You were creating somewhat of an industry. Was that a frustration? Was it hard to educate folks on what it was you were really trying to do? Did people instantly get it and open up their checkbooks? What did you experience?
It was very uneven, and I think you get this with technology companies. The early adopters totally got it. Our first product was a change of address product for email. And I think the reason I found my way to you is someone said, oh, Mark will get this, right? He's a direct mailer or has a lot of experience with direct mail, right? The Hanover business was a lot of catalog and direct mail. And catalogers had a resource called NCOA, National Change of Address. And we were building a product called ECOA, Email Change of Address, right? So the first batch of customers you always have your early adopters. You have to do your best to make things easy and integrated and sort of cross the chasm.
Yeah, I totally remember the ECOA, and you're right. It did make it made a lot of sense almost as soon as we started to talk. And and I think I've said this to you over the years as well. As you were building this business, and maybe I'm jaded by having watched so many businesses now get started, make a name for themselves, and then get bought by a larger organization. Ultimately you sold, and we'd like to hear about that, but you sustained a business for 20 years. What was it about what you were doing that I'm going to imagine you had an opportunity to get out if you wanted, to sell if you wanted, before that 20-year period? What kept you going?
There were a couple things, and I'll sort of bring it back to the twin pillars of the business. One is we just loved what we were doing. Like we loved the culture we had, we loved the people that we were working with. We're just having a great time. But the other, and the substance of the business is we felt like we had more to do. Like we were continuing to innovate, to add a lot of value to the industry and to our clients. And we pivoted the business a few times over the years. So the thing we ended up doing was different than the thing we started doing. And it always felt to us like, hey, there's just a lot more to do here. And even when we sold the company, we had that feeling too, both of those things, right? We loved what we were doing, who we were doing it with, and there was more to do. But 20 years is a really long time for a venture-backed company. A lot of us, were interested in doing other things with our lives. Our shareholders benefited from some liquidity. We found a great partner and a great home for the business in Validity, and it's just sort of the right time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I've mentioned this also to you. So much of what you were doing seemed to me, at least as I understood it, that would make sense as part of a bigger umbrella company that was offering email deployment services or other kinds of database marketing services. And there's a lot of those companies that are standalone today that seemingly would better be served, my mind, seemingly better be served being owned by an Oracle as part of their responsive email platform, or a Salesforce and their exact target acquisition. Yeah, a lot of them, I guess, like what they're doing and choose to go it alone.
Yeah, but we were also, we continued to grow the business and build value. It wasn't static at all.
Right. No, obviously it wasn't. We talk about mistakes though. Any mistakes? I think
Only about a million.
people that have talked to me after they've heard some of the shows, you've said, geez, I really like hearing successful people tell me about the things that they wish they had done differently. Any one or two that stand out for you?
One, we did not build as capital efficient a business as I think we could have at Return Path. We didn't waste money. We weren't one of these like crazy .coms that was burning cash in the streets, but we just didn't have capital efficiency in mind, which is something we're doing very differently at Bolster. And the result of that at the end of the day, it's we built a $100 million business. That was great, and we sold it for a multiple of that, but it cost us too much money over time to get there.
Is that a function of the fact that you pivoted a number of times along the way?
Yeah, that had a lot to do with it. Yeah, the sort of the search for product market fit was too windy and long and elliptical. I think another one that is more sort of around hiring. It took me a while to get the right senior team in place, and there were a couple of positions that I even for most of 20 years really had a hard time filling, and it wasn't until maybe halfway through the 20 years that I decided that we really needed to invest in leadership development to grow our own leaders. By the end, we really had that model figured out. Like my final executive team at the very end, every single person on it was either a founder or someone who had come into the company as like a director level person or maybe a VP and grown up in our own system with our own training and our own culture. And that was a really good model for us because we got great people in the middle who had plenty of outside experience and fresh perspective to bring, but not people who were so far along in their career that they would be harder to mold into the way we wanted to mold them. And I realize that's a very startup-y way of thinking, but that was definitely a lesson that we learned along the way as well. I feel like there's so many things that we messed up along the way. We did acquisitions that didn't work. We had product launches that didn't work. We didn't keep our technology fresh enough, and periodically had to spend a year digging ourselves out of a hole instead of innovating. long list of lessons to learn.
Well, the story is that you can make mistakes and still be successful.
As long as you don't keep making the same ones over and over again.
Yeah, well, true, true. But one of the things that we've talked about is you wrote a book. Tell us about Startup CEO, a field guide to scaling up your business.
I've been writing this blog, which I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, since like 2003 or four, like very early CEO blog. And the blog was really about the craft of being a CEO, being entrepreneurship, leadership, management. And in 2012 or so, I was having a conversation with Brad Feld, who I also mentioned earlier on my board. And Brad had written a number of books, the most popular of which is a book called Venture Deals, which has become really kind of the seminal work about how to get a startup financed. I had a little bit role in Venture Deals that kind of came up accidentally. Brad had sent me the manuscript and asked me to read it and give him some comments on it. I wrote all these really long comments, and when I sent it back to him, he said, "Oh, do you mind if we publish the comments as part of the book?" So if you read Venture Deals, there's a sidebar in each chapter, and there are like 50 chapters, and the sidebar is called The Entrepreneur's Perspective. So you read the book and you read, Brad saying, "Oh, here's how you, here's how you do a venture debt deal." And then there'll be a sidebar saying, as an entrepreneur, here are the things I cared about when we did something like that. And at the end of that, I was having this conversation with Brad, and I said, "What do you think about?" He had this whole book series of startup this and startup that. I said, "What do you think about me turning my blog into a book called Startup CEO?" And he said, "I think that's a great idea." He introduced me to the publisher at Wiley and Sons, and I essentially turned my blog into a book. Although I ended up having to fill in a whole bunch of things that I hadn't written but had meant to over time. So I was a little bit of a labor of love, but a great project. And it ended up being, I think the first edition was about 55 chapters, and it's just designed as a little bit of a how-to guide for a first-time CEO to, for me to sort of document, like, here are the mistakes I made and here are the things I got right. And it's just a bunch of how-tos, how to raise money, how to do a board book, how to do a board meeting, how to fire people, how to hire people. And, it's organized into a bunch of different sections: strategy, money, talent, execution, boards. After I sold Return Path, I did a second edition and added a whole new section, another 5 or 6 chapters about selling your company. And that was published in June of last year, of 2020. My team at Bolster and my team at Bolster is a lot of people that I worked with at Return Path. We are actually writing a sequel that's going to be published in next month or possibly in March. That's called Startup CXO, a field guide to scaling up your company's critical functions or critical teams. And it's basically, think of it as a book of books. It's a version of my book for each executive function in the company. So there are 10 chapters on how to do startup sales, 10 on how to do startup marketing, 10 on how to be a startup CFO, HR, business development, technology, product, et cetera.
That's great. That's really interesting. I can't wait to get my signed autographed copy. The devil's in the details. You've probably heard that phrase time and time again in your professional life. Projects get started with great intentions, but you no longer have the time to pay attention to the little things that can make the difference between success and failure. At Details Interactive, you can discuss your business with a seasoned direct-to-consumer marketing executive who has helped launch and grow web businesses and integrate multi-channel marketing initiatives. Learn more at detailsinteractive.com. So that's great. Tell us about Bolster. You mentioned it. I thought it was interesting, when we first talked about Bolster, I don't know, maybe it's 6 months ago, how many people were part of your team at Bolster that you worked with at Return Path. That says a lot about, your confidence in that hiring that you talked about before.
Well, it also says a lot about their confidence in me, following me a second time. No, we have a great team at Bolster. We actually have 8 co-founders and now a team that's, 20, 25 people in total. We're doing a totally different kind of business. We're, after 25 years in media, marketing, technology, et cetera, we're building a very different kind of business that sort of pulls together a lot of the themes that we've talked about in the last hour. So through my book, Startup CEO, I ended up over the years doing a tremendous amount of mentoring and coaching of first-time CEOs and spent a lot of time kind of in that space. As I mentioned at Return Path, we developed all this sort of leadership training work. We were very methodical about how we scaled up the business, how we scaled up our team. The startup CXO book is all about scaling up each individual function. And those two things, sort of set the stage for what we're doing at Bolster. So Bolster is a marketplace for very curated executive level talent to be connected to startups. One side of our marketplace, the sort of buy side or demand side, is startup CEOs. And we define that as CEO of anything from 0 in revenue to 100 million in revenue. So it's sort of the venture-backed universe, both small and large. People we call members are executives. And, obviously, Mark, you're a member of Bolster, but we have a few thousand members. And we have members in every single functional area: marketing, sales, product, technology, HR, finance, et cetera. And what we do at Bolster is make matches between the supply side and the demand side to help startups think about scaling their executive teams and think about scaling their boards in kind of a new way, and hopefully a way that's much more contemporary. So, the world today is much more agile and dynamic. The gig economy is not just here in the form of Uber and Lyft, but it's here in the form of executive work too. And more people who are accomplished senior executives who've had a great career want to work a little bit here and a little bit there, have more varied work, have multiple clients. They want to give back and be a mentor, or they're interested in board opportunities. And that's really the kind of stuff that we match startups with the talent to do. So it's either, I would say there's sort of three types of roles that we match. One would be executive consultant. So that would be an interim leader for a department, a part-time leader for a department, or just a project-based consultant. The second would be, sort of advisory work. So matching people to be coaches or a functional advisor across anyone on the executive team. And the third thing is independent board members. So that's what Bolster does. We connect vetted executive talent for on-demand jobs at venture-backed companies.
Yeah, that's great. I from the day you explained it to me, it made total sense, because I think it was you just described me, almost to a T. Somebody that would, like board roles, like, interim kinds of, opportunities, could be project work. And I think that there are, lots of folks that I come across almost every day that, are interested in that. So good luck to you on that. I hope that it will be as successful as the other projects that you've worked on.
Thank you. Yeah, so far so good. We're 9 months in and off to a good start, but we got a lot of room in front of us.
Oh, that's great. Tell me about pathforward.org.
Path Forward was a company that we created at Return Path and spun out into a separate company and made a nonprofit. So it's a 501c3. And it's a wonderful organization. It's almost 5 years old now as a standalone organization. Although, as I said, it started as an internal project or program at Return Path. But Path Forward provides a smooth on-ramp back into the workforce for moms who've taken a break to raise kids or to care for older relatives or anything like that. And it's a really, really interesting and challenging problem we solve, and a problem that, quite frankly, just confuses me, because we have, pandemic aside, generally pretty low unemployment in this country. And in the businesses that I've been in over the years, tech, marketing, media, there's way more jobs available than people to fill them in a lot of cases. Women who've had a career of 2, 5, 10, 15 years, and then they take 5 years off or they take 10 years off and want to get back into it. And there's all this sort of built-in bias to the system against hiring people like that. And it's just kind of crazy. It's like, talent that's sitting on the sidelines. So what we created at Return Path was a returnship program, and then we rebranded it Path Forward and spun it out. But basically, Path Forward creates programs for companies and does a tremendous amount of work with company enablement to get a company ready to hire people like this, and then creates these structured 16-week paid jobs. And they're not fellowships or internships, like someone is working at the company. But Path Forward does a lot in the way of professional development and networking and skill building for the women in the program. the company has served almost 100 clients, including some amazing clients like Amazon and Walmart, as well as smaller companies. The company has served hundreds and hundreds of women at this point. We have an 80% hire rate. So at the end of the, on average, at the end of the 16-week program, 80% of the women are offered full-time employment. So it's doing great work. It's actually a little bit more related to Bolster, if you think about it, than it is Return Path. I continue to serve as the board chair there, and Tammy Foreman, who's our CEO.
Very nice. You're a good soul, Matt. I can see why so many people have flocked to stay with you through Bolster. So that's great. So we end these shows with this 2-minute drill. The show's called The Marketing Playbook Podcast, and for those football folks out there, it's a 2-minute drill. So just 1 or 2 word answers, 7 quick questions. You ready?
I am ready.
Okay. A brand that you admire or that inspires you?
It feels a little cliche, but I'm going to go with Apple. And I know Apple's a good company. It's a company a lot of people hate. There are things about it people love and hate. But what I really admire about it is their products are just so well designed, so intuitive, and so well designed. I wish every product was well designed like Apple.
Right. The favorite app on your phone, and I'm guessing it's an Apple phone.
It is an iPhone. My favorite app here, I'll give you one that's probably a little bit different. I'm a Little League coach for my kids. And there's an app called Game Changer that I use all season long to manage my team, score games, etc. And another app that does some of the other things called Team Snap. So those are 2 apps that I'm in constantly.
I only wish my son, who I coached with many years, wound up following in my footsteps and coaching, even when he doesn't have children. He was, in college, and he was coaching, and he introduced me to Game Changer. I wish I had that, years ago when I was, keeping the book, with a pencil. The last website other than Amazon that you shopped from?
The last website other than Amazon that I shop from is a specialty clothing retailer called Ororo, Ororo, and they make heated apparel. So in this COVID world where the only way to hang out with friends is to do it outside, and it's like 30 degrees out, I have on the way a heated vest. So you have to charge it with a USB charger at night, I guess, but you can get through a social event outside.
Okay, that's perfect for me because I am always cold. Something that you're not good at but wish that you were.
Guitar, singing, guitar.
Charitable organization that you're passionate about.
Well, I got to go with Path Forward on that one.
Okay, I knew that would be it. If you had one superpower, what would it be?
I need more hours in the day. So whatever superpower gives me more hours in the day, stop time for 2 hours in the middle of the day where I'm working and no one else is, or.
That's a good one. And then the last one, other than family, what's your most prized possession?
We have a second home, which is a cabin in the mountains of Southeast Idaho, right near Grand Teton National Park in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And we absolutely love it. We love going out there and spending time, winter and summer.
That's great. And so lastly, Matt, thank you again for doing this. Where can people reach out to you on social media?
LinkedIn, is the easiest one. I do have a Twitter account. I'm not an avid tweeter. As I said, my blog is onlyoneblog.com, but it's about to become startupceo.com, and matt@bolster.com. All of those work. I am an email guy, as you know. So
yeah, you're a very adept at email and quick, a very highly responsive guy. So somebody takes after my own heart. Anyway, Matt, great to see you. I'm glad that you're well. Thank you for all the good work that you did in Colorado to help the folks out there, and all the good things you're doing with Bolster. And I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Mark.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Matt Blumberg for coming on the Marketing Playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1, culture. Every company has a culture. Some develop it, and others just let it happen. We heard Matt speak about how he wanted to have a company that was a progressive employer. If you are leadership, even though so many companies have evolved over the last few years, there's more to do. Push harder in this area to reward your employees and develop an environment where people can be successful. If you're the employee, push your company to invest in training and quality of life initiatives. Number 2, we've heard this one before. Even very successful people who start companies and have successful exits have usually made many mistakes along the way. You'll not get everything right the first time, but keep trying, learn from those mistakes, and stay positive. And number 3, if you're thinking about starting a company, make sure that you're clear in your mind and can communicate to others what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Matt was an early leader in the email marketing space. He saw a void in a young market, but he knew which problems he was trying to solve. It just took a number of iterations before he was able to find the right positioning in the market. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at DetailsInteract and learn more at detailsinteractive.com. Until next time, the devil is in the details.